Welcome back, episode 141 of The Grouch and the Brainstorm. I'm Mike, and today, in keeping with our normal holiday routine, we have another speaker, but this week's speaker is going to be our very own Matt. And I know earlier in the podcast and coming through the podcast, we had Matt tell his story. But this one is a live story that was recorded in Waskom, Texas, not too long ago. And Matt gets into his story just a little bit deeper than what we're normally used to hearing from Matt's story. And you can always tell the growth. And it's always wonderful to have one of our very own. So, as a Christmas bonus, episode 141 is going to be our very own Matt L. Take it away, Matt.
I'm Matt. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict, and I'm a lot of other things too, good and bad. My sobriety date is May 6th of 2018. Working on 8 years. I'll just start at the beginning and. Grew up in the Shreveport-Bossier area. That's where I'm from. My home group is the 5:30 at the Koala Club over there. Grew up in the Shreveport-Bossier area early on. Spent high school, kind of bounced around Louisiana. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. My mother, there's a bunch of us in this program. So grew up in that, was neither one of my parents drank, smoked, never heard them say a bad word. I mean, nothing, and I remember my whole life just being that world and very kind of sheltered, and I'll never forget my dad. I was maybe 10 years old, and all I'd ever heard was gospel music or something like that. And he popped in Johnny Cash live at Folsom Prison. And I was about 10 years old. And I remember hearing A Boy Named Sue, and I was like, man, I like all that. Like, whatever's going on with that, I want to where did this come from? And so my dad, but I grew up that way. Now I had alcoholism running through both sides of the family. I mean, it was very obvious. Wasn't as a young kid, but I remember growing up and my parents, it was just don't do this, don't drink, don't run around with girls, don't do this, don't do that. And I remember as I got a little older, I remember thinking, well, man, that's all the fun stuff is what they're telling me not to do. Like. I couldn't figure out why it was always just don't do anything fun. There was never any explanation with it. It was just don't do it. Now, after treatment and being in AA, I understand some of the don'ts. But they didn't bother explaining that part in the 80s. So they didn't explain much. But I rocked along and kind of my parents decided they were gonna part ways, have a divorce. They get divorced, and I go to live with my mother. And it's kind of confusing. Growing up in the ministry, I guess you would say, you move a lot, and so I was always moving. It was always a different place, a different group of people. Every year at school, I had to make a new football team or basketball team. I was never followed over to the same year, same school. And it was always kind of awkward and, just made the best of it. Myself and my two brothers. But it was you never got comfortable. You never had that feeling just like I'm with my group, I'm with my people, this is where I belong. You never had that feeling. And, I remember I was 14 years old, went to spend the night with a guy that I was friends with, and he said, my dad's got some beer in the garage. And I was like, all right. And I didn't know nothing about it. But I said, it sounds like fun, So And y'all, I don't know how much beer it was. It wasn't much. It was a big bottle of it. I know it was Budweiser, and I can still taste that beer today. I can taste that drink. And what's so odd about that, looking back on it, is I drank alcoholically from that first drink of not even knowing what it was. And I remember he drinking a bunch of it, me drinking a bunch of it, and then he's acting wild and he's falling off the bed and all this stuff. And I remember putting the lid, it had a screw top lid on it, and putting it under the bed because I was like, if his mom busts in here, he's acting stupid. I'm not gonna be able to drink the rest of this. Who thinks that? You know, I mean, really. And now I understand why I think that way. But he had a good time and was done with it, and that began a thing for me to where when I did that, I was part of whatever crowd that I needed to be. You know, I was comfortable wherever. And my mother moved to South Louisiana. We lived on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain in high school. And this will tell you how messed up I am if any of y'all follow podcasting. But Theo Vaughn, we went to the same school. We were ate lunch together, all that stuff. He was one of the many. So there were some weirdos came out of that. He's a good guy. But that group of us, I remember getting down there and going, this drinking thing just got taken up a whole other level, you know. And to jump ahead to the mentality that I was dealing with in high school, those friends of mine, we're all still friends, and one of them lives in Arizona now, and we had lost touch in my addiction, and I got sober, went to treatment, didn't even tell any of my friends. Like, I hadn't even talked to them in years, and didn't know what to say, so just didn't say a word. And I get a call from him one day, and he goes, hey, man, I heard you went to rehab and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And I still don't know what to say. You know, I'm about 6 months sober, and I'm like, yeah, you know, and he said, well, that's good, man. That's good, you know. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, so what's the deal? You know, I said, man, I quit drinking. Don't drink. Don't do any pills. Don't do any of that stuff. And he sat there for a long time. It was real quiet. And he said, you drink beer, though, right? And I was like, no, sir, I don't drink beer. And he said, do you smoke weed or something? And I was like, no, I like all the stuff that you're naming, I don't do any of it. Whatever it is, in his mind, they just couldn't understand, like, well, beer doesn't count, you know, I guess. But that was what I was dealing with of coming through, growing up in that. And I found my people, I thought, when I got down there. And, every day was a party, and I thought, man, this is great. I mean, I'm finally having fun. I'm doing the things I like doing, and we had a great time. We had a friend of ours, Dad, who he on a sad note, he passed away from this disease. I was at the funeral 2 years ago. We were in high school, though, and he would not mind me telling this, and one of the funniest people that I've ever been around in my life. And he decided that, being an alcoholic, I'm going to get me a second business, and I'm going to buy a limousine, and I'm going to drive it to proms and stuff. Well, he's a damn alcoholic. He's not driving, chauffeuring people anywhere, okay? So he buys a limo, but it's kind of a step-down limo, like 10 years old. Nobody wants to rent that, you know? And then the driver, he's in the bag. So I don't think he ever rented it out, but it sat out in front of their house on Lafayette Street in Vanderbilt, and we would just sit in it in the yard and drink out of the dispensers in the limo, the liquor dispenser. We would just leave the doors open, turn the radio on. We started taking that thing around in high school, and we would take it to New Orleans. There's parking issues in New Orleans unless you're in a limousine. They don't know who's in there. We pull up at a bar and they'd wave you right up. Oh, y'all get right here. Come on, park right here. And we get out and they're staring at us like, who are these people? Like, but that was the kind of things we were doing constantly. And and we just went to I just went to that funeral, and it was very sad, and I got to kind of talk with his son, who I grew up with, there towards the end of his life, and he tried to do a lot of things to right the ship, and I think it was just too far along by that time. But one of the best people I know, and still this disease it does that, it just has that effect. And, but I had a great time in high school and running around having fun. And I just thought, this is not, this is great. This is awesome. Still didn't understand looking back. I do, but I didn't understand even then. Those folks drank often. It was always drinking. But then at the end of the night, they were all kind of gone. And it'd only be one or two of us still around until it was all gone. And so they were able to have a good time and have drinks and do that kind of thing. But it was a little further along for me. It was a different level of it to me. And the friend's father that I told you passed away several times. And I'm being 16 years old. He's a 40-year-old man with the same disease. And he would pull me to the side and go, you may want to, think about what you got going on here. And I think it was his way of just maybe hoping I would rein it in. And of course I never did. But wound up meeting a girl from Jackson, Mississippi, got married, had kids, got a job in sales, and I was going around, traveling all over the place. Another thing you don't want to do as an alcoholic is someone give you a credit card and say, hey, take these folks out for drinks and dinners and put it on this credit card and be sure you take somebody out every night. So I did that for a while, and that didn't work out real good. I think I've told this before, but I was later on in my late 20s, probably early 30s, and I got fired from this place not long after that. But I came in with a receipt on a bar napkin from the hotel that I had been drinking in with some customers. They never bought anything, but they were customers. But I came in with a $500 bar tab, and the bartender, I'm leaving at the end of the night, and I said, I need a receipt for all that. And he said, this is a cash bar. And I said, I don't care what kind of bar it is. I need a receipt to get my money back. And he said, here's all the receipts you're going to get. And he pulled up a bar napkin with the name of the bar and the hotel on it and wrote $500 and signed it. And I took that thing in and turned it in on an expense report, and they paid it. They paid me. And I should have known. My manager looked at me and he held it up and he looked at me and he goes, really? And I was like, that's all I got. That's all I got. I'm turning it in. So I did that for 10 years and did really well at the sales part. And that's the thing, I kind of being in this program and being around and seeing folks come and go and do. We are some of the most driven, best people when we're put on something positive to do, whether that's work, whatever it might be. But we can be the most destructive when we're put on something negative. And even with the negative going on, I did great at my job. I did great at a lot of things for a long time until I didn't. And the drinking got to be more important, and the hanging out at night got to be more important than the stuff that was going on during the day. And I ended up getting fired from that job. Man, I walked in, the same guy I handed that napkin to. About a month later, he handed me a box. And he was like, this is for you. Put all your stuff in it. And I went, oh, okay. And I was out of there. And I got out of sales and bounced around. We were still in Mississippi and bounced around doing different things. And couldn't at that point, the realization had started that you got something going on here. Like this is, and thick-headed me, at that point, it took a decade for me to have the thought of, maybe this is an issue. It had been an issue for a long time. And around that time, I hurt my back, and I go into the doctor, and he gives me these little pills. And I went, man, these are pretty good. Like, this goes good with the alcohol too. You know, you put those together and it's kind of, so that became its own monster real fast. And I had both of those going on. And kept trying to work, kept trying to do things, couldn't keep a job, couldn't show up on time, couldn't do all those things. Ended up separating with the ex-wife now. Ended up separating, and I had got a job working for a guy, was cutting grass and working for a grass crew, and I was driving one of his trucks around, and I was sleeping in the truck. So he didn't know I was living in the truck, but I was living in the truck. It's supposed to be for work. But I was so bad, in such bad a shape it was about 2013. I said, man, I got to do something. Didn't have a cell phone. So I found a phone book. They had them still, even in 2013. Found AA, I guess it was the central office number there in Mississippi. Called the 800 number. They said, there's a meeting over here. It was at a church. They said, go over there. It'll start at 7. So I sat in that truck and I was watching the people walk in. And they were laughing and smiling and dressed decent and looked like normal human beings. You know, I didn't know what to expect. And I thought, man, I can't go in there. Like, I'm sick. I'm sweating. I'm throwing up. I'm not in good shape. They don't want me messing that deal up, you know. And I didn't go. I never went in. Wouldn't go in. And so I rocked on for quite a while. And I thought you would think that would be, you know, hey, man, you're sleeping in this truck and, you know, you can't function without stuff in your system. You would think that would get you pretty quickly move along. And that was 5 more years before I went to my first AA meeting. And living like that for so long, watching friends die, just left and right. Out of that group of folks that I kind of grew up with, I think right now there's about 12 that have passed away or died from this disease one way or another. And they never got the chance to get the chances that I got, and we're not fortunate enough to do that. And but I'm watching them die as I'm in my addiction and going, oh yeah, I ain't there, you know. And I was right there. There was no difference in them and me at all. But went on, just kept having issues, you know, scuffling around work-wise, doing whatever I could do. And the ex and I had separated on and off. She'd get sick of it, leave. And so finally one day I'm laying in a chair, my recliner, passed out. It's a Sunday morning, and my ex-mother-in-law and father-in-law and my ex-wife's brother came over, and they were standing over me looking at me. I wake up, I'm like, what the hell, you know? And they said, we want to give you one shot. We found a place that will take you. If you want to go, we'll take you right now. If you don't, we don't ever want to have nothing to do with you again. This is your shot right here. And I said, for whatever reason, I said, all right, I might as well. And then my second thought was, I got shit hid over there, and I got to figure out how to get to that stuff without them. So I said, let me go pack my stuff. And they go, oh no, we're going to pack for you. And they headed down the hall. Well, they didn't know I had that truck, and it had about 8 consoles in it, and I had stuff all over. So while they were packing, I was getting rid of everything that I had left. And they drove me. They had found a place that would take me as a detox, and that was the extent of it. And I went in that night and never been in an AA meeting. Didn't know anybody in recovery that I knew. Didn't know anyone to talk to about it as I went along. Everybody I knew used and drank and did everything, and that just wasn't a subject we talked about. And I get in this hospital, and there was a lot of people in there detoxing, and there was an old man. They had the plastic chairs, you know, and all the bench things, and they had meetings in the detox. And I had gone to one because there was nothing else to do, and I sat in it. And this old man, he had played football at Ole Miss for Johnny Vaught back in the day. He had been a football player, and he was 35 years clean and sober from pills and alcohol. And he did the meetings in there. And so I listened to him the first time. And the second time, the meeting was going to start, I guess, the next day. And I'm laying across the bench, just, I don't know what I'm doing. And he's just sitting in the back of the room. Nobody else is in there, and he's waiting on it to start. And I finally raised up on the bench, and I said, hey, man, let me ask you just straight up, are they going to do brain surgery on me? Like, what are they going to do? Because I'm not going to be able to leave here and do that. 35 years, man, you're out of your mind. Y'all don't know. And he kind of started laughing, and he's like, oh, it ain't that, ain't that big a deal. And I'm like, no, this is a huge deal. Like, you don't understand what you're dealing with, man. And he said, man, you're going to be all right. He said, just hang in there, but I said, what are they going to do, man? They can't stop me from thinking about getting drunk and high. So how is that going to work for me? Because y'all can't. And I said, you can't tell me that you don't think about it. That's what I told him. I said, man, you can't tell me. I don't care how long you've been. He said, oh, I do. And I went, oh. And he said, I do, but it's just a thought. And he said, sometimes I'm watching TV and a whiskey commercial comes on and I go, man, I never got to try that one. And he said, that's about the only thought I have with it. And I said, see, but I'm going to go try it. That's where I'm going to. And he said, well, just, hang around a little while. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I laid in that hospital for about 4 or 5 days and thought I was feeling a little better. Unbeknownst to me, some of the other things I was taking was going to be a little longer detox and a little weirder than I thought. But they would walk through and they would say, hey, we have a rehab bed open in Memphis or Mobile, Alabama, or wherever it might be. 1 for a man or 2 for men or whatever it might be. And I just was like, man, I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And I watched people leave, and finally I said, well, okay. And they walked through and they said, we've got a place in Corinth, Mississippi. And I knew Corinth, Mississippi, because when I was a tire salesman, it was a little place in the middle of nowhere. It's right up in the corner of Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi. And I knew Corinth, and the only thing they had was a really bad strip club in Corinth. And I remember that from a long time ago. And I set up, and I don't know if that's a God thing or what, but I said, I know one thing about Corinth. If they ship me up there, I'm 4 hours from where I live. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a dollar to my name. And that's going to be a long walk. So I might stay. Right? That was the only thought I had. And I said, I'm going to that one. They sent me. The rehab that I ended up going to was run by the state of Mississippi. So it was not, we didn't do horse therapy or none of that stuff. We didn't do like swimming. We didn't have none of that crap. And they bring me in there, and I'll never forget, it was rec time when I got there. And I've never been in rehab. And they walked me through the building, and they said, everybody's at recreation right now. And I walked outside, and there was about 50 people. They were all on one volleyball court, 25 on each side. Guys had on big old work boots and overalls, whatever they were wearing. All 50 of them had a lit cigarette in their mouth playing volleyball. And I just went, this is my spot right here. These are my people. I like whatever's going on. And I did. For the first time ever, I was like, this is my kind of folks. I don't know why they got them all pinned up in here, but I'm in here with y'all. And it was such an eye-opening, humbling thing. But it was, for once in my life, I finally was around folks that were honest about what they were doing. They were honest about why they were there. And all they were trying to do was help me or somebody else get a little further along that day. Whether it was an hour, whether it was 15 minutes. And I never experienced that. I didn't experience that. And not talking about church, but it was my own. I thought that's how church was supposed to be. And I didn't experience that growing up in church. But I did around them folks. And there was a guy. I had everything I had was in a Walmart bag. I had 2 T-shirts, and they both had alcohol stuff on them, and they wouldn't let me have them. They said, you can have them when you leave. So I didn't have nothing but the clothes on my back. And a dude that had been living in a dumpster and thought there was more people in there with him gave me 2 shirts to wear. And I'm like, you were living in a dumpster and you got more crap than I do. Like, you know, and he actually got dumped by the garbage truck in the middle of the night, and they started to crush his foot. And the driver, there's a camera, and he said, I think I dumped a guy. And like got out and called the police, and they got him out. And he said, did y'all get the rest of them that was in there? Nobody else was in there. It was just him. He was just, that's true. That was my roommate for the first 30 days I was in treatment. And I thought, man, this is great. You know, like I understand what's going on here. I don't know what that says about me, but I got in and I still was real sick. I wasn't doing well. Was having a hard time. I hadn't been eating, hadn't been doing all those things and that we normally would do. And they said, we think you need a little more time. I started hallucinating, you know. They said, we're going to send you over to our little spot across the street. So they sent me over to the mental hospital. And you know what? I got in there, and the first time where I feel like God just slapped me right between the eyes and said, you real cool, dude. They gave me a medium scrub pants, a 4X scrub top. This was run by the state of Mississippi. We ate the same food that the county jail ate. They delivered our food on them plastic trays at the rehab. There you go. 21 men, 21 trays. That's it. That's what we ate every day. No frills, nothing fancy at all. But I remember sitting in there the first morning, and I was sitting there. I didn't have no shoelaces in my shoes. They take them. And I remember thinking, man, you are doing good. You know, like you've really, really done it this time. Nobody even knows I'm there. My family don't even know I'm there. I'm just up there. My ex-wife and them did, but my parents, my brothers, they all lived over here. They didn't even know I was in, you know. And I'm like, well, this ain't going well. She finally gave me some medicine, allowed me to sleep for a couple of days. I don't even know what she gave me, but I pretty much slept off and on for a couple of days. Got up, felt better, and they sent me back over to where I was. And I, for the first time ever, I went in and I had a counselor, Miss B, and she was just no BS, you know, and it was straight down the middle. And I went in and I started talking to her, and I said, look, you know, I'll give this a shot, you know. I said, I'll give it a year. You know, I said, I'll give it a year. Arrogant as hell. I'll give it a year. We'll try this out, but it ain't going to work. And I'll just go back to what I'm doing. And she said, let's review. She said, you came here with a Walmart bag. You hadn't eaten in about a week. Probably hadn't took a bath in about a week. Nobody wants nothing to do with you. You ain't got nowhere to go when you leave here. I said, that's right. And she goes, why don't we just try to get through the next hour or so? Let's see how that goes. And I said, whatever, that's fine, you know. But I remember talking with her. And for the first time ever, I went, you know what? I don't know. Somewhere along there, it became, hey, you got a shot here. And it was not my idea of fun by any means. But something started clicking, and I think God was just putting things into place to where I could see a way out of it. And I remember sitting in Miss B's office, and she had degrees from Ole Miss and USC and all these places. And I said, you know, that's pretty cool. You know, you got to know something about this if you got all that stuff on there. And she wasn't one of us, but she had 2 kids that were. And she told me, she said, here's the thing. She said, I got all that stuff, but I can't talk about it like you can. She said, I don't know nothing about it. I can't talk to my kids. I don't know what they feel. I can clinically do that, but actually knowing, she said, all you guys in here are way more qualified to talk about it than I am with all my degrees. And I went, huh. And she said, that's what we're going to work on when we're here is you guys, us going out and doing things to help others along the way. And she was fantastic. And we had a lot of speakers come in and they would talk. And I remember sitting in there and I'm like, man, that guy's making big money. Like this dude, I don't know what they're paying this guy to come up here, this lady to talk to us on a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere. But I mean, just gas money, it ought to be nice. Like they got a racket going on here. I didn't know till about 60 days in, it was $0. Those people came and did that because somebody had done it for them. And, but that's the selfishness of it. It never dawned on me. You might do something to just do something to help somebody maybe. And that just blew my mind. I was like, y'all don't have nothing else to do. You got to come up here and hang out with us. But I got in there with those guys and I got to the 30-day part of the program, and I'm trying not to run long. Okay, I'm okay. And they had an extra part you could stay an extra 60 days. And they give you a little job, and they take you to work and bring you back and all that stuff. And, man, them first 2 weeks were tough. But by the end of that third week, I was Bill W. Jr. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm ready to go. I got it all figured out. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm feeling better. I walked in Miss B's office. I said, well, about time for me to get up out of here. You want to go ahead and give me my diploma or whatever I get? And she said, I don't know. We need to talk about that. And I said, what is there to talk about? And she said, I'd like you to stay the other 60 days. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. I really don't. And she said, well, why don't you go back and pray about it and then you come back and tell me what you think? And I said, I'm going to go pray about it. But I feel like God's saying right now, just go on, let's go. She said, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Well, we did. And hat in hand, I thought about it that night. And I said, you know what this lady has told me every step of the way has told me nothing, but it's been in black and white. The straight truth. There's been nothing, and everything she's asked me to do has worked. And for whatever reason, I have 30 days almost of continuous sobriety, and I hadn't had that in 25 years. And whatever, you lock me up, you can do whatever, but that was a big deal to me. And I said, I'm just going to trust some people that I'm going to trust her, and I didn't trust anybody, didn't trust myself, so I couldn't trust anybody else. And I went back in and I said, if you think I need to do it, I'll do it. And I said, I don't want to. And she said, well, that's what willingness means. It doesn't mean you like doing it. It just means you're willing to do it. And I said, well, I don't like it, so I guess I'm willing because, look, that place, and yeah, there was a lot of folks out of jail. It was a rough crowd in there, as I'm sure most rehabs are. We didn't have a TV. We didn't have any of that stuff. You got an AA book and an NA book when you walked in the door. That's it. There wasn't no TV to watch. We didn't watch TV. We had devotionals. We had all kind of stuff constantly. But from 5 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night, it was recovery. Something to do with recovery, and then you went to bed. And that was a shock to my system. There was no other distractions. It was just that group of guys and doing what they required us to do. And so I was looking forward to like eating Mexican food and stuff, and like not eating county jail trays. That crap was getting old. But I said, we'll do it. We'll do it. And so I stayed, and it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. And I think it really made the difference in just being on my feet a little more as I got out. And I ended up being in there 97 days. And my brothers lived here. And they came and visited me, and he said, hey, man, we're going to, we'll help you out any way we can, if you want to move back over here or whatever, if we can help you, whatever we can do. And so I get out of rehab, and I come here from Corinth, and I'm going to sleep on my brother's couch, and trying to make it work with the ex-wife, who is an ex-wife, so it didn't work. But trying again, but I said, I'm going to go sleep on the couch, find a job, start that whole process. So, still don't have a cell phone. But what I did have was, when I went into that extra 60 days, those ladies at that, the place was called Ability Works, and it was great. And it was for people, rehab folks. If somebody had special needs, they would give them a job. Caterpillar Equipment Company had a deal that you could do, and they'd pay you. But what they also would do was help you, like, make a resume, do stuff like that. You could go in and do that. Well, they made me make a resume while I was in there. And I've been in sales, I've been in all this stuff, never had a resume. Made one in Ability Works. And they made me lay it on thick too, man. It was, So I got to get a job, and I got these resumes I made in rehab, basically. And don't even have a cell phone. Don't have any way to contact me, But I left my brother's house, and I started driving. And the first place I saw, and I'll say their name, was Hoagland's Landscaping in Bossier City, right there on Viking Drive. And that was a business I had been in for doing that type of work. And so I just drove up, and it was September by that time. It was September, end of the season for that kind of business. They're not hiring, And I went in, I walked up, and I said a little prayer and said, look, I really need this. Like, I need to find something. I went in, had the resume in my hand. The lady at the desk says, oh, we're not hiring. It's the end of the season. We're fixing to lay people off. And a guy comes walking by right in front of me, and he said, I got a minute. I'll talk to you. And he grabs the resume and just keeps walking. And I went, okay. Well, it was the general manager. So I go sit down with him. And he said, man, we're not hiring. He said, I'm sending guys home. We're laying guys off. We won't start again. But if you want to come back in the spring, we'd love to have you. And he's looking through the resume. He's like, man, you're way overqualified for this. And I'm like, I understand that. I said, but I need a paycheck is what I need. And he said, let me get the maintenance supervisor in here. So they come in, and the guy's like, man, I'm laying people off. Same story. And I said, I tell you what to do, man. I said, give me 1 week, whatever job you got for me. At the end of the week, if you don't like what I did, you don't owe me a dime, I leave. No hard feelings. Okay? And he sat there and he looked at me. He said, I've never worked a man for free. And he said, I ain't going to start now. He said, just come back Monday. We'll put you on a truck and we'll see what you can do. They put me on a truck. Low man on the truck. I started. 30 days later, they promoted me to the foreman of that truck. 3 months after that, they made me the chemical spray manager, and on we went. All that was for once in my life getting out of my own way and doing what was right in front of me, the right thing to do at that time. And that was a new thing for me. That was a new concept of, I want to control all this stuff out here. But in getting sober and going through that process and getting a sponsor, which is the second part of this, that was why I wound up at the Koala Club. It just happened to be right down the street from where my brother lived. And it was the closest place I could get to. So I started going there, and they had a lot of meetings, and I went to a lot of meetings. Every time it was open, I went. And I didn't really meet anybody, and I didn't really sit around talk or make friends or any of that stuff. But I knew they told me, go to meetings and get a sponsor. Miss B told me leaving. She said, you don't do nothing else but go to meetings and get a sponsor if you do nothing else. And so I did, and I see this old guy in there, like the second or third meeting, and he kind of didn't, he didn't look like a serial killer or anything like that. He seemed pretty normal. And I was like, man, I'm going to ask that dude to sponsor me. And it took me about 2 more meetings to do that. And it's kind of like asking a girl out on a date. It's like, but you don't got alcohol. So you're nervous and, So I finally slid over to him one day after a meeting, and I said, hey, man, I guess I need a sponsor. And I said, are you willing to do that? And he said, well, I don't know if you want me to sponsor you. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I only got about a year of sobriety. He said, I'm a sheriff's deputy here in the parish, and I got drunk and rear-ended a lady at a red light and got arrested by my own guys. And I said, you're my man, dude. You're my man. That's some shit I could do right there. And he said, all right, well, then we'll talk about it. So he's still my sponsor today. I talked to him today. I thought, you know, I've learned we can do some stuff in this program. But he started me slowly with that, and we started, and that growing up in church and growing up listening to sermons, and every time the door was open and all those things, what didn't happen was that I didn't personally take and try to apply that stuff. I just assumed I'm here all the time. I must figure out where God is or what God is or he should be doing for me because I'm here every Sunday. Well, it don't work that way. And it took me a long time to figure out spirituality versus a religion, and I'm not knocking any religion or any of that stuff. But it took me a long time to figure out God was there and had been there the whole time. And I started to see that in recovery. And I'd never seen it, probably blinded a lot beforehand, but I did see it as I moved along, and I had to start trusting that trust thing again. And I had to put a trust in doing those steps, and I had to put a trust in believe somebody has some power, and it was not me. And then I started to see those things, and those positive things change. And I went, man, this is something to this, you know. And I left rehab with 90 days. I got that job, and it's funny in here, the wind, sometimes we have things that the world may think no big deal, but to me it was huge. But I remember driving down the road, my dad had given me this old car, and it had, not kidding you, it had 500,000 miles on this car. It didn't have no windows in it. When I got out of treatment, he said, dude, I got this old car at the house. I was going to have it hauled off. He said, all I know is it'll crank. He said, it may not make it to the end of the driveway, but you can have it. And I said, that thing's mine. And I went and got it. My dad stood in the driveway with me the morning I came to get it. And he said, I want to pray for this car. And he did. We prayed for that car. I drove that car for almost 2 years. For $13, I could fill the whole tank up and drive anywhere I wanted to drive. I didn't have no money. $13 to fill up my car, man. But I drove that thing everywhere. My kids hated that car. They wouldn't ride with nobody ride with me. But it served its purpose. And I learned to go, I'm real grateful for this car, man. Like, I'd been in sales and they gave me a new truck every year. Every year, brand new truck. Whatever the new one, just tell them I don't want that one and go get that one. I did that forever. Then buying vehicles and doing all that stuff. And I'm happier driving down the road in that busted looking car. And things are just, I couldn't have been happier, you know. And as time went on, I moved over to another grass company. And I'd had that old car forever, and it was in the middle of the winter, man, and it rained on you and all that. I mean, you had to have a good attitude in that car. You had to work on your attitude. And but you know, I don't know that I ever felt any ungrateful or embarrassment. And I just went, this is where I'm at, man. And like, but what's so funny is all my people in AA and my immediate family, the people that really care, they don't care whether you're driving that car. They right there with you. I didn't have to put on this thing of, oh, I got a new truck. I got this. I got that. I don't have nothing. It's obvious I don't have nothing. You know, you find out who your real people are in those situations. You know, I went to rehab with all them folks that I took out to eat and did all that stuff. You know how many of them called, check on me? Zero. Tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Whining and dining and good times and all that stuff. None of them. My brothers, my family. And I get down here and I make my second family at the Koala Club. And I better hurry now. But I really learned to just be grateful for what I had. And I went in one day to the place I was working. I came in, the owner was sitting at his desk. I was the only other guy in there. And he said, we had a F-150 company truck, a few years old. And he said, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And I said, what's that? He said, I'm going to sell you that F-150, man. You got to get out of that car. You know it's raining and shit. And I was like, nah, man. I said, I don't have any money. None. I don't have any money. He said, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to sell it to you. And I said, I don't know what you're not understanding. Like, you said sell, which means I'm going to give you some money, and I don't have any money. Like, I'm in the car. That's what I'm doing. And he said, well, let me finish. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm going to charge you $4,000 for that truck. He said, I'm going to take $400 a month out of your check, $100 every week. And I was like, man, And he said, but I'm going to turn around on Friday when I take that 100 out, and I'm going to write you a check for 100. And I was like, hold on, let me think about that. And he said, Matt, I'm going to give you the truck. He said, my bookkeeper won't let me just give it to you. He said, so this is how I'm going to have to do it. He said, I'm going to do some fancy bookkeeping. And that joker gave me a F-150. Nice as you... Man, what you talking about? And I gave that car to somebody else in recovery. As far as I know, they still driving that darn thing. But I gave it to them just the way it was given to me. But the point of all that being, things have gotten better. And we do recover. And I've seen recovery. I still have the same sponsor. I still do a lot of meetings. Man, 2 years ago, I had a guy that I go to meetings with, been sober a lot longer than me. He said, hey, man, let's do a podcast. And I said, about what? And he said, we could do one about sobriety, or we could do one about serial killers. And I said, I can do serial killers. I know a lot about them. I watch all that stuff on the thing. I said, I don't know that I have that much to talk about sobriety. And we ended up doing one about sobriety. And we've been doing it 2 years now. We have folks come on and tell their stories, and our friends, and we have people from other parts. And it's so much fun. And I look back and I go, I have 2 grandbabies today. I got 2 grandbabies. I wasn't thinking about grandbabies sitting there watching them folks walking that AA meeting that night. That never crossed my mind. I just never figured I would be there to be around for that kind of stuff. And man, I've got to do so much. And Miss Bonnie texted me the other day and said, pretty please, will you come speak? And I said, you don't have to twist my arm. Anytime we're asked, we go. And I'm really glad I came over here tonight. And if y'all get bored, come see us over in Bossier and say hi to us. And thank y'all for having me.
And thank you, Matt, for telling your story. Again, any speaker we get, anyone who wants to come on here and tell their recovery story, always welcome to. What a great thing to be able to do, and what a great thing recovery is. So that's going to be it for episode 141. Looking forward, working on episode 142 right now, but it's not ready. So from Reno, Nevada, and Bossier City, Louisiana, we are the Grouch and the Brainstorm.